Madison and his career, his life. Hey, we had the street festival last Saturday, 2 Saturdays back, and it went well. We had, I think, 16 new signups. I added those to our email list. So our email distribution goes out to 180 people now. And I think the street festival was a success. Talked to a lot of people over the day. And thank you, Jim, for what you did, and Vicki, y'all did a great job getting everything there with all of you, logistics. We're going to do that every year.
Is this your first year to do that?
No.
Is this your first year to be at the?
No, we did not do it last year. We did do it the year before that and the year before that, right? So is this our third time, Vicki?
You just missed the year before. This past year, you've been in the street festival, right?
I think that was our third time. Yeah.
Good.
There's a lot of people there. I didn't try to walk in. I had a friend drop me off. Because, I mean, thousands of people there. Yeah. Well, Patrice takes the credit for finding and bringing our speaker here. And I want to ask her to introduce Bill. So we should have a great evening, and thank you again for coming. Okay. I'm supposed to turn this on, so recorder. Here it is. That's a recorder. Okay. Awesome.
All right, hello everyone. We have with us tonight Bill Holtzclaw, and he is a former Marine, retired Marine. He also he also worked in at NASA, and I think he's going to tell us some of this. But just to give you a little background, he in 2008 ran in local politics, and he also city council. Yeah, and then served 2 terms as our state senator from this area. And I have heard, I think, maybe part of this talk before, and it was actually very interesting to me because he ended up being in office when probably 2 of the most major things that have happened in this area occurred. So I won't spoil it. I'll let him talk about that. But so if you would, welcome Bill Holtzclaw.
Thank you. I'm going to be, I'm informal anyway by nature, so I'm going to be real informal. I have a microphone and I'm being recorded. But I'll try to be informal. But if you have any questions, I really just kind of enjoy a dialogue. If you have questions or spark your interest in something that I'm going to share tonight, I welcome that. I will tell you, I've got a little bit of a pinched nerve right here that's kind of affecting me from turning. When these young ladies came in, I tried to turn and it reminded me of it. I could probably derail the whole evening with y'all talking about medicines and surgeries, and because anytime we get around some of our other friends, they have a younger daughter that's just like, oh my gosh, it's time to leave the room. They're going to talk about, I tried this. Or,
It gets worse.
Exactly. That's what worries me. That's what worries me. I will tell you up front, I'm not 60, but I can see it from here. So I'm very, very young, but I did spend 20 years in the Marine Corps doing exciting things, and I kind of, rode this body pretty hard during those few years, and some of that's catching up too. But it's all good. When Patrice asked me to speak tonight, what instantly came to mind was first of all, let me clarify this. There is nothing historic about me. I'm not old enough to have any kind of that, in my opinion. But I did look back and recognize that I was in Madison at an interesting time. And so I just, she asked me, do I have a title for what I was going to talk about? And I said, well, I refer to it as this time in my life and this time in Madison as the man in the mirror. And so I just kind of want to caveat it with that, and I'll give a little backstory, and then I'll talk about some of these events. I will share the most startling thing, and I researched I'm glad I did because I'm being recorded. I researched some of the things tonight, slide that, for tonight to make sure my dates were factual. And I want to share you that in a nutshell, looking back, when I decided to get into politics and was elected to office in 2008, everything was kind of okay for a few months, but within a 10-month period, the city of Madison experienced 5 events that most cities our size, let alone larger cities, will ever experience. Okay? We had a tornado come through. we had a school shooting, we had a plane crash in the subdivision, we had the swine flu, and we raised a half-cent sales tax to build James Women's High School. And folks, that happened in a 10-month period. And I look back at my role in that 10-month period as a city councilman and as a city council president, and then ultimately getting elected into the state legislature. When I left the council, I was worn out after just 10 months. It was a 4-year commitment when I was elected to the city council. But I look back at everything, the stress that went through those 5 events. Those are 5 significant events that occurred. And I'm going to share little anecdotes about those as best I can as memory serves, and kind of keep us on track. But I want to start out by saying that, so I was born and raised in Arkansas. Some of y'all know some of my life story because I shared it when I was in politics, and it is in fact my life story. But I was born in very rural Arkansas, in a town you don't drive through, you drive to it, turn around and come back out. It's in Phillips County, Arkansas, and it's a long story, complicated story, but essentially the day I was born, it was a complicated family situation, and I was orphaned at birth, and I was raised in foster care, raised in an orphanage until I was about 5 in Little Rock. And then I was taken in by a foster family. I was never adopted, but I was raised by a foster family in Northeast Arkansas. And I had older siblings and younger siblings in the foster family. We had what we needed, but it was a struggle looking back. My goal was to graduate high school and get out of there. And that's what I did. So I was able to graduate high school, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and was not a good student, was an okay athlete. But I knew that, well, God had a plan, and I just kind of followed it. I did marry my high school sweetheart, and she's a couple of years younger than I. We've been together 38 years now. But I enlisted in the Marine Corps and traveled the world, spent most of my career in Southern California or in the Orient in Japan. And really looking back, had a wonderful career, really enjoyed what I do, and encourage the youth anytime I have an opportunity to look at the military as a way, because there's many, many opportunities to do many things. Had no idea I'd stay in the Marine Corps for 20 years. But this takes us to 1999. I was in Southern California and was supposed to go to Washington, D.C. for my next assignment. I was a Marine Corps Chief Warrant Officer at the time, and I worked in ammunition and explosives was my skill. And the job I was supposed to go in Washington, D.C. was a really cool job working with procurement of what we call non-lethal munitions. And those are the type of things that they don't kill you, but they make the bad guys incapacitated so other people can go in and take the situation under control. It's really going to be a cool job. And unfortunately, the officer in charge of the Marine Corps Detachment here at Redstone Arsenal had a medical event and had to retire like almost instantly. And so I was the only guy that hadn't moved that year because my oldest daughter, was still in elementary school. And so they called me and said, hey, we're diverting you. You're not going to Quantico, Virginia, Washington, D.C. You're going to Huntsville, Alabama. And I was like, goodness. So that takes us to July of 1999. Me and my family, I have a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old, that we moved here to Redstone, and I become the officer in charge, the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Detachment here at Redstone Arsenal. And I'm like, okay, we live on base there on Redstone, and about a month or 2 into it, we decided to start looking for a home, because my options were that I could live on post, or I could decide where we wanted to live. And my wife and I looked long and hard, and I wasn't sure I was ready to get out. I had 16, almost 17 years active duty time. You can retire at 20. And so I wasn't 100% sure I was going to get out, but I was like, my wife and I grew up in Arkansas, same climate. We're not that far away from family, same culture, values, whatnot, as far as the people and whatnot, And I really didn't want to go back to Southern California. Southern California was wonderful when I was an 18-year-old kid, okay? It was not when I'm raising a couple of kids, okay? So at any rate, we started looking for homes. And we found the house that we are currently still in, right here off of Waltran, in a little subdivision. I joke with people that I live in the shadows of Pebblebrook. If you know where Pebblebrook is, there's a little subdivision on the other side of Waltran with little ranch-style houses. And that's where we raised our daughters, that's where we lived, and we're still in that same house, and I absolutely love it. My point of reference when I was in California, where homes are this close apart, which pretty much everything around here is now, all the new stuff. But I wanted a ranch-style house with elbow room and big trees, and that's what I got. And so I decided to hang on to it for over the years. So that's where we are, summer 1999, and it's the first house I'd ever bought. We always either lived on post or on base, or rented apartments. But now we're living in Madison. So I have literally grown roots in Madison, okay? 2003 comes up, and it's time for me to decide if I'm going to stay in the Marine Corps and accept a move. And sure enough, they want to send me back to Southern California. I was at my time to be able to retire, and I told the Marine Corps, I said, hey, had a great time. Thanks for everything, but I'm going to exercise my choice, and I'm going to retire. And so I became a retired Marine in February of 2003. And then I looked up and said, what am I going to do next? You know, my wife was working. She still works for a financial firm. She's a financial advisor. She was doing well. My children were doing well in school. Both of them went from, see if I can get this right, Heritage. That's one of County Line Road, right? Yeah, Heritage to Columbia when it was built, to Liberty Middle School, to Bob Jones, and then both of them went to the University of Alabama. And so I think Madison City Schools wonderfully prepared them for their life, and they're all doing things now. I can talk more about that later. But I did a couple of, I ultimately ended up working at Madison Research Corporation. John Stallworth, a lot of folks know him, living in Madison there. John had his company in Madison, and I did contract work there. So I was working contracts with Madison Research. And then shortly after that, I had some friends contact me from NASA that knew me and said, hey, Bill, the Obama administration is plussing up. Would you like to become a government employee? And I said, man, this is it, okay? I'm going to be retired Marine. I'll work for NASA for 20 years, get that retirement. I'll work for Social Security. I said, I'll be set when I get old, right? I'll have these 3 income streams, I'll be set, right? Well, so I went to NASA and I worked out there for a few years. And at the same time, in 2008, is when I began to pay attention a little bit more to local politics. Guys, y'all probably remember this, but remember the good old days when somebody would drive by and throw a newspaper on your driveway every morning, okay? I could literally go out every morning and get a newspaper off my driveway, and I actually enjoyed reading the newspaper, I really did. So I would read the newspaper, and I saw where Madison City Council had elections coming up, and one of the council members in the district that I happen to live in was decided to run for a county commission seat. So he was by virtue of vacating the city council seat. Bob Wagner, great guy, okay? So Bob was a multi-term city councilman, and he decided to run for the county commission seat. And so I looked at it and told my wife, I said, I think I want to run for city council. And she said, no, you don't. And if she was here, she'd have a whole other story to tell you. But long story short is I did ultimately run for the city council and in 2008. And, you know, this was before any kind of social media stuff. This was out boots on the ground type stuff, trying to run a campaign in 2008. Strangely enough, and I've been told it's never happened since, or happened before or since, strangely enough, no one qualified to run against me. I was the only person that qualified to run for the Madison City Council for District 7, which is north central Madison, in 2008. Now, qualify sounds like an important word, okay? Qualify literally means that you go to the city clerk and you give them a piece of paper that says that, like a utility bill, that says that you've lived there. You sign an affidavit that says I lived there for a year, and you pay a $100 qualifying fee, and I qualify. You know, I was the only one that did that for District 7 in Madison. By proxy, I was automatically elected. The day qualifying ended, because there's a date that they cut it off, because they can develop ballots and whatever that. I got a call from the city clerk saying, congratulations. So, and the funny part about this one, I will tell you, back in Arkansas, we had been visiting with my grandmother, who was not doing well at the time. And I love her perspective on this, because she was in a senior assisted living facility. And I was visiting with her and telling her about the campaign and whatnot. And then later we went back, and I was filling her in, and she says, well, how's it going? And I said, well, no one qualified against me. I won. And she looked at me and she said, exactly what did you win that no one else won? So, surprise. So she was 100% spot on there. So that's how I was elected to the city council, okay? And that was in 2008. Mayor Finley won his election at that time. That was his first 4-year term. Also on council, and I've got my notes here in case I forget any of them, Jerry Jennings, Steve Haraway, Tommy Overcash, Larry Vinoy, Tim Coles, and Tim Holt, okay? And then myself. We were the 7 city council members, elected in 2008, took office. And guys, we were just, we're trying to figure out, what do they say? It's easier to campaign than it is to govern, okay? So we're trying to figure out how to do some of the things we talked about that we would do or not do in the city of Madison. Surprise, even back then, roads, it wasn't still as an issue. Schools, We have crown jewel schools. And I didn't tell y'all, when I was living on post and trying to decide where I wanted to grow my roots, we had narrowed our search down between Grissom High School and Bob Jones High School, solely based on test scores. That's all we were really looking at as a future family to decide to live in Madison. I'm glad we chose Madison. Nothing against Grissom, nothing against Huntsville, but I'm sure glad we chose Madison, okay? So that takes us kind of up to speed where it's the beginning of this new administration here in Madison. And this is the historic part of it that I'll share with you. So just a few months into it, the first event happened was in April of 2009. So we were elected in August of 2008 when we were elected, and then we took office in November, I think it was. And then here we are, April of 2009 was the first event that occurred that made us realize that, oh, wow, okay. Now, we just came out of the pandemic. You know, the COVID-19 stuff is hopefully behind us. How we reacted is, you know, how individuals went up much broader and wider scale than the swine flu. But think back, pre-pandemic stuff. You get your first indication of something going on, and we began to have, we had a couple of cases of the swine flu break out here in Madison County. And they were right here at I want to say Heritage Elementary School is where the first. Turns out there were some folks that had gone down to Mexico, and it was prevalent in Mexico at the time. The CDC was watching it, but it was prevalent in Mexico at the time. But some folks had gone down on a mission trip, they had come back, their kids had gotten infected, and their kids were tested positive with it. Okay. Pre-pandemic stuff now. Nowadays we'd be like, wear a mask, go get a shot. Okay. Now it's way more, back then, I mean, it was way more, whoa, what do we do? Okay. So, you know, as a city, one of my roles on the city council was I was a liaison to the school district. We have our own separate school board, and so each city council member has different roles. And one of my roles was the liaison to the school district. So I went to all the school board meetings and voiced any concerns the city council may have had to the school board. The school board did the meeting, and I would come back and report to the council if the council meeting was public. So I kind of had an inside track on what was going on. Well, they come out, the school board, the state board of education, or the state Department of Health, and the CDC are advising that we close one of the elementary school that was infected. Okay. Well, then it comes out that there's someone, and they played soccer together, who knows, but now another elementary school's got a case. Okay. So over the weekend, we're having to close all the elementary schools. Okay. We're having to make this choice. I'm literally in my living room having phone conversations on conference calls with different members of the school board and the city council and the mayor. You know, and we're not breaking any laws, because if more than this meat, it's a problem. But we're aware of all that, you know what I mean? Well, the decision's made that we're going to close all the elementary schools, but we're going to keep the middle schools and the high schools open because we didn't have anything going on there yet, or at the time, right? A few minutes later, this is early cell phone. A few minutes later, my youngest daughter comes in the room and she goes, Dad, Elizabeth's mom wants to know, we're going to close the middle schools too, or the high schools, or just the elementary schools? And I'm going, what? Elizabeth's mom, well, it was her friend's mom. She'd been texting a friend. She'd been feeding a friend information. So I said, oh no. From my living room. So I called Dee Fowler up and I said, okay, Dee, you need to get ahead of this. I said, you probably need to do a press release pretty quick, like for the next 15 minutes, because we got to mow. And oh, by the way, it's another one. So that was the first conversation that my daughters had and I about what you hear in this house stays in this house. Because politically, there are things that can, you know, they can get out, and it was funny. It wasn't funny even at the time. It's funny now that I had to rein that in. But basically, my daughter was feeding information to her friends unknowingly, innocently enough, and her friends were to other moms, and goodness, yeah. So at any rate, we were able to. If you remember at that time frame, that was in April. Truth be told, we were just trying to get to the end of the school year. Okay, our push was to just get to the end of the school year. We ended up closing for a few weeks and did a big wipe down of everything and got it under control. Thankfully made it to the end of the school year. And the swine flu is a passing thing for the city of Madison. But you can't help but, through my eyes, look at how when the pandemic started and how we had a little bit of what to do and how to do it based on that. So that was the first event that kind of caught us off guard. The next event was in May 2009. We had this EF2 tornado come through Madison, which is to my recollection, during the time that I've been here, it was the only one that really touched down and kind of came through the city of Madison. It actually cut through, it skipped over my house a little bit, but it cut through. The best one I can give you is from Asbury and Bob Jones, as it cut through that big field there, took out a bunch of those beautiful trees, and then went through on up Eastview a little bit, and ended up lifting out of Research Park and went away. It was only in the F2. Okay, we had no real injuries, but again, April, we're doing swine flu and trying to get the schools closed. It's a multi-month event. May, and if memory serves, and I was trying to find this, and I couldn't find any place to document it, but basically, school was out that day because of a weather day. They build in weather days in case of basically ice and snow, and if they don't use them, then they'll give the kids a day off, or the schools a day off. Were you in school? Okay. All right. And again, that's where I need a fact checker.
Because they came, we hadn't even, the day hadn't started, but kids were in the building.
Okay.
And they told us to shelter.
Okay.
And then that kind of blew over, right? Because there was a series of
Right.
tornadoes that came through.
And it may have been what I was saying. I was trying to remember. We felt relieved that, I guess you're right. We felt relieved that the kids were in school and not out. They may have been out before something. At any rate, it turned out to be a non-event, but still, when you're a city councilman, you're the president of the city council, and you've got a tornado on the ground coming over your house, by the way, but you got a tornado. There's certain things that, your role is not to be in the way of the firefighters or the police or EMS or anything else, but your role is to be involved as much as you can be involved, and to be a conduit for the community, and know what to do. So fortunately, nothing really happened there, but now as I look back, I marked it off as the second of the events. Ongoing at that same time, probably one of the most challenging things, and I'm going to share just a little bit of inside politics on this one, is we raised a 50-cent sales tax for the city of Madison to help fund James Clemens High School. Okay, so going back, and again, it's amazing to me how all these, when I look at these dates and how they all kind of overlap. The vote for that happened in November, late November of 2009, okay? But all of the work that went on before that was coinciding with all these events that were already occurring. Of course, and those of y'all that have been in Madison a long time, you already know about these things, but the decision was to try and determine where we're going to build onto Bob Jones more, because at some point, my argument at that time was we're going to hit critical mass where you already have this gigantic building, and now we're going to build a community college campus, essentially. And there's no going forward. You're going to have to always have a Bob Jones, or you're going to have to make a decision to build a second high school. Of course, Superintendent D. Fowler, Paul Finley, myself, and a bunch of other great people in the community got together. And the first thing we established was this Blue Ribbon Committee to really start to drill down and look at and be able to communicate to the citizens what direction we should go, but also be able to get information from the citizens on what direction they would support. Okay, so the first thing that happened was the Obama administration had these bonds that they had developed, and they came to the state of Alabama. A little over $100 million came to the state of Alabama. Governor Bob Riley at the time decided to grant Madison a little over $16 million for, do I have that number right? No, $36 million. Because the turnkey, James Clemens' turnkey was going to be $64 million. By turnkey, I mean desk, everything you need, not just a building, okay, was going to be $64 million. The qualified school construction bonds were $34 million. We had to come up with the other $34 million to make that happen. How are we going to do that? Where are we going to do that? Or were we going to build on to Bob Jones? One of the craziest alternative things that came out of that Blue Ribbon Committee was actually consideration of year-round schools, and not closing the schools, but rather having part of the student population go to school during a certain time of the year, and then part of it would come the second time. And the impact of that, though, was going to be on the elementary and middle schools. So it really became a non-starter. Can you imagine? We were thinking about doing year-round schools. There was a thing where we were going to refinance some bonds and try to get a better rate, and then we were going to try to be able to match some funding there. But it all boiled down to, essentially, we needed a 50-cent sales tax is what was going to put us in position to be able to, and really smart guys from New York City, Wall Street came down and laid out all this stuff, but basically there's tables that would show us that with enough money raised, or enough sales tax raised over a period of time, that we would be able to borrow that money and match and then build James Clemens, okay? So, set that aside. I'm the council president. I'm working with the superintendent. I'm working with Paul Finley, the mayor. On the other side of the equation is I had been contacted by the state Republican Party, and they had asked me to consider running for the state legislature, to run for the state senate, and they were going to help me get things moving along. I, at the same time, was working at NASA, and I shared this a little bit earlier in the room. I was working at NASA as a full-time employee, and the minute you get into partisan politics, something called the Hatch Act comes into play, and you cannot work as a federal employee and be involved in partisan politics. Now, city council is nonpartisan. City council was, I did have to go through an approval process with NASA so that I could be on the city council. And it's kind of funny, we had a couple of groundbreaking events out at NASA, out at Marshall when I was out there. And I would take paid time off and go to one of the events as a city councilman and wave to my boss and sit up front, and then I go back to work. You know, so it wasn't a problem being a city councilman in nonpartisan politics, which in Alabama, now some states council or city municipal elections are partisan. Okay, Alabama is not partisan. Okay, it could get there at some point and make it messy. But all that to say, it was not an issue that I was a city councilman that worked at NASA, but the minute I decided to become a candidate for the state legislature, the state senate, it became a problem, and so I had to resign from NASA. My wife says I was unemployed. I said I was a full-time candidate. So I was a full-time candidate for about 14 months during the election process. But here I am running as a Republican for the state of Alabama for the state senate, and on the same side, I'm over here championing a half-cent sales tax for the city of Madison. The state Republican Party said, we got a problem with this guy, okay? And I'm over here going, no, everybody I talk to says this is what we want to do, you know? So I'm really having to work. If you know politics, I'm really having to work these things, okay? So this is a very little known, you ever talk about history? This is a very little known fact I'm going to share with you, okay? One of the ways I crafted the ordinance to get the half-cent sales tax on and to get 6 of the 7 council members to come on board with me was we put a sunset provision in the ordinance. And the sunset provision says, I'm going to read it to you word for word in a minute, but basically what it says is, this was a way that says, look, we need to borrow this money to get the $36 million, to match the $36 million, and we had a time frame to do it, or the Obama administration, or actually Governor Riley, was going to pull the $36 million back. We had to craft a way to make that happen. And I brokered the deal and put it on the table that said, when the $36 million is paid off, there's a sunset provision in the ordinance that makes the half-cent sales tax go away. The second trigger in it would have been if a property tax is voted on by the people of the city that replaces the sales tax, then the half-cent sales tax goes away. Now, just so you know, procedurally, in the state of Alabama, a municipal body can raise a sales tax. Only the people can do the property tax. So you voted on a property tax, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. So only the people, the legislature creates the opportunity for you to vote on a property tax. But only the people can tax themselves on their property. That's in the Alabama Constitution, okay? Y'all, I'm not a lawyer. I just learned all this because I got involved. Remember the man in the mirror? Okay. So, you elect a municipality. The municipality can, in fact, raise your sales tax, which is what happened. But I brokered that deal, and I got 6 of the 7 councilmen to come with me, or 5 of the 7, because I was the 6th, to come with me, and we passed the half-cent sales tax. And we started collecting the sales tax. We were able to match the $32 million, $34 million, or $32 million, build the 64. Look at James Clemens now. Look at Madison City Schools now. Look at what has happened, okay? And look at the development out there, you know? Look at as both of these schools continue to thrive, the number of National Merit Scholars, the number of you can just go on and on the accolades about our school system. Okay. And I believe, and it wasn't me, it was a group of us, okay, that all the people that I mentioned earlier. You had a phenomenal school board at the time, you had a great city council and mayor, in my opinion, and we had the vision to move forward with that. But I will tell you, though, a crucial part was factoring in the sunset provision in that legislation, or in that ordinance, okay? So what happened to the sunset provision? Well, fast forward, November 2010, I was elected to the state senate. I don't remember the exact date that I did this, because it was, it just has it, in November 2010, I was elected to the state senate. And when I left the city council appointed someone to fill my last 2 years. And one of their actions was to rescind the sunset provision. And they took the sunset provision off, okay, because it was a new council. And so, unbeknownst to me, something I learned in the legislature, though, okay, is anytime what I should have done was made it unseverable. Meaning you can't take that out and the rest of this be in place, okay? And I wasn't legislatively smart enough yet, because I didn't have experience. Okay, had I made it an unseverable clause in the ordinance, they wouldn't have been able, because had they taken it out, they would have had to vote on the sales tax again, basically, had they taken it out. But hey, it worked for them. They answered to the constituency. We still have the high school. We still have the asset sales tax. You know, Huntsville followed with the asset sales tax. You know, and it continues. And I just wanted to share that little piece of very inside baseball with you of how that all went down. And you got to watch those rascals. Oh, yeah. I'm telling you, you got to watch those rascals. So that was a half-cent sales tax, and that was in November of 2009. Okay, so I'm still campaigning at that time for the state legislature, because we started in the summer of 2009 for a November 2010 election. But the next thing that happened was the plane crash out on County Line Road, and that happened in January of 2010. Okay, and it actually turns out it was a, well, let me tell you this part first. So, you know, I'm off the heels of everything else that's kind of going on in my life and going on in the city. It was in the middle of the week. My wife and I I was supposed to be campaigning, but my wife and I were at Sam's, and we had made a quick trip into Sam's, and we got our buggy or our cart loaded with stuff we don't really need. Every time you go to Sam's, you buy stuff you don't need, in giant sizes you don't need it in, you know. But we're up checking out, okay? We're literally moving things across the, you know, and my phone rings, and it's Mayor Finley. I answer the phone, and Paul says, "Bill, we've got a plane down in the subdivision on County Line Road." That's all I know. So I told my wife, I said, "Leave everything." I said, "Get me out on 565, going to County Line." From my days in the Marine Corps, I served 2 combat tours. I knew big smoke, big plane. Small smoke, small plane is what I was hoping for. Right? So we get out on 565, and I'm looking at, and it's my role. Paul had passed it off to me as council president. It's my role to call all the council members and say, "Hey guys, this is what's going on," and then I'm interfacing with media or pushing it off to Paul. you know, but fortunately, it's what we know now is Ashbury subdivision, and it was just kind of getting started. It was and I know this because I read about it today, kind of making sure I had some of my facts straight. It was a 6-passenger airplane that had left Florida, refueled in Huntsville, was on its way to Nashville, experienced engine trouble at takeoff, tried to turn back, and the pilot was credited with putting it down it could have been worse, but he put it down in the subdivision in a part that was not being built. Had two on board, both died. You know, but that kind of blew up suddenly everybody's concerned about flight paths. Okay, to my knowledge, Madison City. Now there was, I want to say in the 70s, there was a bad in North Madison County, an airliner crashed well before I was ever here. But that was the only incident of a plane crash in the city limits of Madison. Okay, you know, and you start as council president, as council member, you start hearing, you know, oh my gosh, we've got, you know, all these big, the big cargo ones that come through, the passenger ones that come through. Oh, what about the touch and goes? You know, when we have a great, phenomenal runway there, and so you have that's revenue that comes back into the Huntsville Airport Authority. But you have pilots that are training and they're doing the touch and goes. You'll see the same planes taking off and landing hundreds times, but you know, 20, 30 times. You know, they're doing touch and goes. And so suddenly now we're facing all of this at city council meetings, and you're like, guys, you know, we have great fire rescue. We have great, you know, everything just played out exactly like it was supposed to. You know, can you imagine the first calls that came in when a plane crashed on County Line Road? You know, think about it now, how populated it is, and more populated as it's going to get. You know, fortunately, it was manageable, and everything went the way it was supposed to go. But again, I look back at this all happened in that 10-month period. You know, so and then the last thing that happened in that 10-month period is probably the darkest day of my time on council. It was in February of 2010, and that's of course the school shooting there at Discovery Middle School. And I would tell you, I can tell you exactly. I was on my way to Birmingham for a black tie event with Governor Riley and a lot of the Republican people, and I was supposed to be getting introduced to some people that I needed to know in Montgomery. I was literally standing in my kitchen wearing a tuxedo. Didn't have my tie on yet because I won't put it on until I actually have to go in the building. But I'm wearing a tuxedo, and I get a phone call, and unfortunately, I had my ringer off for a little bit, and I'm in the kitchen, and I could hear my phone doing that on the, and I picked it up, and it was Steve Harriway, and he calls me, and he said, Bill, there's been a shooting. I'm like, oh. Okay. So I hop in my car, and like I'm going to do anything, but all the council members, there used to be a fire station across the street, okay, and all the council members and mayor, that's where we were going, okay, and I would say that's probably the only time in my 10 years in political office that I badged my way in anywhere, is because I needed to get there, and so I'm passing a bunch of parents that are trying to get to their kids, as I'm trying to come up Hughes Road, because I come across there at Gooch, and I'm trying to come up Hughes Road to get over to the fire station where we were going to meet, like we're going to do anything. I mean, fortunately, nowadays you hear a school shooting and you instantly go, how many, what's all involved, and it's very, very sad. I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But it turns into what it was, and most people know it was two of the boys there at the school, middle school, and there's a whole bunch of history on that. But what came out of that are the community meetings over here at the old library. Is where we met some, and then we met a couple of different other locations, City Hall, and the Text to Protect. Is that what it's called? The Text to Protect. Was one of the key things that came out of that, where had there been, because there was some information, some relevant information that could have been elevated by the kids at the school days before that shooting occurred, but there wasn't any way to elevate it. And so now the Text to Protect was one of the first things that came out of that elevated to get us to where we are with respect to that. But again, that looking back, that was probably the darkest. Anytime a child loses his life, and a child that shot a child, so arguably both of their lives, and families, extended families, it's a horrible, horrible situation. And working with the community, reassuring the community. I remember when the schools opened back up, I found myself over there opening car doors and getting kids out of cars that morning. And I'm not an educator, but anyway. But I'm, hey, welcome back. You're trying to give some sense of normalcy to something. It was tough. It was a very, very tough time looking back. So those were the 5 major events that I look back. Remember, I said there are communities, bigger than Madison that will never experience one of those events. We experienced those 5 in 10 months, a 10-month time frame. And then to kind of bring it in, remember I talked about the newspaper that gets tossed on your driveway. There was also some, at that time, being reported, so I'm going back to before I ran for city council, in my mind, if y'all can keep up. That's right, that's where I'm at. I'm going back to that. There was some what I want to say, there were some shenanigans going on in City Hall where the mayor was secretly recording council members in conversations, and there was some kind of silliness that was being reported. And I remember telling myself that somebody ought to do something. And that's where I use that. That's where the man in the mirror comes in. Okay, I want to kind of, I saved that for last, but that's where the man in the mirror looked at me and said, "Let's do something." And again, my wife was like, "No, you don't want to do this, And I cornered her one day and I asked her, because being in politics is hard. Okay, it's a hard road. And you're going to make some of the people happy. You're going to make some of the people not happy. You're going to make some people downright mad. There's so much misinformation that people are acting off of misinformation, and you're like, what are you talking about? That's not even close to what we're discussing, People are disengaged, or then they become engaged and enraged, and you're just trying to figure it all out, and you're just trying to do the best you can. But because that council position came open, because the council member did not seek re-election, so it was an open seat, is what made me, I couldn't have had an easier path in. if you think about it, okay? I mean, nobody qualified against me. But my grandmother, you know, exactly what did you win and no one else won, you know? So there you go. But that's the man in the mirror. That's the story behind it all. And again, I do encourage people to consider looking at the political world, and we need, in my opinion, we need people. I'm not an attorney. I didn't know what I didn't know until I didn't know it, okay? I literally had to go ask the question of, well, can I do this, you know, this sunset clause? I mean, what if we made it go away, you know, and that got other council members on board, you know, but now I realize that my real goal was undermined because I didn't know to put a severability clause in, you know, which I learned when I went on to the legislature in Montgomery. So, but I encourage people to consider, we need common people in the political world that can speak the common political, or the common language, not the political language, so to speak. And I'm a big champion of that. So I encourage folks to look at that. So, yeah. So I think that's really all I had to discuss. So I was pretty candid about kind of that short time. So 2 years on city council, 1 year as a council member, 1 year as a council president, and was elected to the state legislature, did serve 2 terms in the state legislature. We looked at a congressional run. I left. A lot of people, if you look at it, a lot of people that consider a congressional run do what's called a safe run. A safe run means that you're elected to a 4-year term in the legislature. 2 years in, they run for Congress. If they don't win, they still have 2 years to serve in the legislature. I believe in term limits, and I term limited myself. So I did first 4 years in the Senate, second 4 years in the Senate, did not seek a 3rd term, and ran in an unsafe, or without a safety net, to run for Congress against Congressman Brooks. I had some businessmen in the community that were frustrated, some defense guys, and they were behind me, sort of. Later I found out they were writing me $5,000 checks and writing me $10,000 checks. And I'm like, hey buddy, this isn't going to work, you know. And so there was the invisible hands that kind of do work the political scene that's there, you know, and so I decided, so I withdrew from the race before. Remember, the qualifying date ends when your name's going to be on the ballot. Well, I didn't like the way that the invisible hands thought that I was supposed to be doing things, and so I gave them the problem back, and I decided to retire, and so that was the end of my political career. So it's called a career by time. So anyway, I just kind of caveated with that. Any questions, comments, commentary?
I've not been here in Alabama terribly long, but when I called my daughter, who, should I say it? Yeah, in Washington, Jaguar, and she said, I called, I'm moving to Alabama. She said, no, you can't do that. You have no mother. You simply cannot go there. No, you know, I've already buried 2 husbands, you know, including her father. You can't go there. And then 2 or 3 days later, she called back. She looked up Alabama schools, and this part of Alabama, you know, of course, we all know the Black Belt. And I came back and look what I found.
A treasure.
Yes, a treasure, yes.
Well, there's a good Alabama guy. So yeah. Unless that's the only clean shirt you had.
I'm pretty good at mine.
No, I'm kidding. I always get in trouble when I say that.
But I just needed to let you know that.
Well, and education is,
Alabama.
you know, and it's a continuing battle, continuing struggle. You know, some municipalities and counties do it very, very well. You know, I use this analogy whenever I speak in politics. Is anytime I looked at a piece of legislation, I would put my reading glasses on and say, how does this affect my district?
Yeah.
Okay. But then I take those reading glasses off and say, how does this affect my state? Because it's 2 different perspectives, and I've got to look at both of those. And you know, here in Huntsville, Madison County, Limestone County, I can go on. I don't want to leave anybody out. But we do a good job in educating. We can do better in some areas, but we do a good job. There are some areas of our state that they keep doing
that too.
Well, they keep doing it the same way, and they keep getting the same results, and they're going to be there as long as until they decide or the state takes over. So anyway, that's a whole other weekend. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Well, there has been some talk that we've got 2 full high schools, and we may be looking at either expanding 2 high schools or building another one. I mean, have you heard that? And do you have any thoughts on how we're going to do that?
You know, it's funny, and I would encourage y'all to go do some of your research, because I was on Google this morning, because I waited till the last minute. I knew what I wanted to talk about, but I waited till this morning to fact check myself, you know, about that. And I came across this slideshow. It's probably 25 slides and I'm trying to, I think I Googled half-cent sales tax Madison, Alabama, and I saw this slide deck come up. But it had projections on building out the city and building out the schools. And there was this part of me that says, it would be phenomenal to compare that to today, you know. And then I remembered I'm retired. And, you know, and both of I have 2 grandsons. My daughter, for a variety of reasons, has chosen, they live here in Madison, but my daughter has chosen to homeschool my grandsons. And I support her decision with regards to that. And she's doing a phenomenal job. And I'm going to tell you, it gives me time. I got to take them to a program at Botanical Gardens the other day, because she had to go do something. So me and the grandsons, Botanical Gardens, you know, I'm not going to pass that up. You know? And so, but I don't know that answer. I know that it affects our city, don't get me wrong. Probably I think one of the biggest things that affects our city right now, of course, is continued congestion. And, you know, we're high-rises popping up, and the footprint of a high-rise, and the number of cars, and how they're going to get out on the roads that are still 2-lane roads. And then I remind myself, I'm no longer an elected official. Hey, I have this thing for all my retiree friends. It's like, don't leave your house before 9. Okay? Make sure you're off the road at 11. You might have a shelter in place somewhere. You know, you can get back on the road around 1:30, and then don't get off. You know. So I have these little windows of time, and I'm just, you know. So I do hope our current leadership, both at City Council and school board, you know, as well as we've got to continue, you know, the mayor battle in Huntsville and Mayor Marks in Athens. Your county commissioners have got to continue this work together, because that is the other thing that even when I was running for office in 2009, you know, my district ran from Limestone County, from the other side of Athens, okay, the Lauderdale County line, Limestone Lauderdale County line, all the way to Research Park, okay, was the district. And I would tell people, look, they don't care who owns the road. They just know that they've got to commute that every day, you know. And that's what we had to address. And unfortunately, it's still lingering as an issue, even though they've raised your gas tax too, by the way. Okay, we're paying a whole bunch more for gas tax, but all that money's going down to the coast. It's not coming up here. So anyway, look at me getting political. Anybody else have any?